Right, Revelation 13 this morning, verses 11 through 18. We were having a discussion at the dinner table about what the mark of the beast was and the end times, and as I thought about it more and as we talked about it more, I figured it'd be good, since I see so much floating around about it, for us to just kind of review. We've looked at this passage before. You remember we did a whole series on the end times. Gosh, it was probably 3 years ago. It seems like yesterday, but that's the way that time seems to move now. And I've heard a lot of discussion about it among people that I've talked to. I see it online. People talk about it. Seen it on social media a lot, especially on Facebook. I would always say be careful what information you get off Facebook. A lot of it's wrong. A lot of it's right. But, you see it there, and it's good to catch up with people on Facebook sometimes. So I thought it'd be a good idea for us to get a refresher about the mark of the beast. I've heard some say in the last few weeks that this right here that I've got in my pocket, I keep it in my pocket when I'm not wearing it, is the mask. That the mask is the mark of the beast. And that it's the mark of the beast. And why is that? It's because you can't get food or other supplies unless you have it on right now, right? And so that's what some people say that. I've heard some people say that a microchip will be installed when you get the vaccine for the coronavirus, and that will be the mark of the beast, because you won't be able, unless you've got that chip in, you won't be able to buy or sell food. And I will say, as we go back and look throughout history, every time something of worldwide import happens, something big worldwide like this, people try to tie it into the end times. And church, when the time comes, when the end times come, we're not going to be wondering if it's the end times or not. And that's what I'm getting at. If we're having to have a discussion about it, it's not time. All right? When the time comes, we're not going to have to guess whether it's the end time or not. There will be many signs and many wonders that will be done that will make it absolutely clear to the church and to all those who have studied Revelation what is going on. So let me get us into the context of where we are in Revelation at this point. 7 seals have been opened. War has been rampant. Food has been very scarce. Some people say, well, did you see how we had kind of a meat shortage and some shortages? What it talks about in the book of Revelation, it's basically enough wheat to make a loaf of bread for a day's wages. We hadn't quite got to that point yet, have we? I mean, we're talking about a serious food shortage here. 1/4 of the earth has died from famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. A great earthquake has happened. The skies seem to disappear, as do the stars. Then we had 7 trumpets blow in Revelation. Fire has fallen from heaven as hail, burning up 1/3 of the earth. 1/3 of the sea is made blood. A meteor has hit the earth and ruined 1/3 of the water. The sun is darkened by 1/3. Satan is running rampant, and a great army led by 4 angels appears, and another 1/3 of mankind dies. A first beast appears rising up out of the sea, like a leopard with bear's feet, lion's mouth, and a bunch of horns and heads. A blasphemer that is worshipped by the people. Have we seen any of that yet? No. Right? We haven't seen any of that yet. We will one day. If the Lord lets us live long enough, we'll see that one day. But that first beast that rises up out of the sea is the Antichrist, and it's the beginning of an unholy trinity. You have the dragon, which is Satan. You have the first beast, which is the dragon's son, the Antichrist. And then we are introduced in this passage to the 3rd member of this unholy trinity, and that is the second beast, also known as the false prophet. While the dragon is a fighter, the Antichrist was more of a political leader, and the second beast is more of a spiritual leader. The power of this false prophet is breathtaking and should strike fear in those who do not believe. 5 times the Greek word peio is in there, and it means to make somebody do something. It's kind of like, I'm going to make you say uncle, and I'm going to twist your arm until you say uncle. I'm going to make you say it. He says he's going to make the The false prophet will make the people do these. It occurs 5 times in the text, really 7 times, but 2 times it's in a different context, different meaning. But 5 times you have that word make going on. He doesn't just encourage the worship of the first beast. The false prophet doesn't just say, hey guys, y'all should worship the Antichrist. He makes them to do it. He makes them do it. So let's take some time and go through the actions of the false prophet found here and try to decipher some of it, and then look especially at this mark of the beast. We're going to see might in verses 11 through 12, miracles in 13 through 15, and we're going to see the mark in verses 16 through 18. It says in Revelation 13, starting in verse 11, "Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of the people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. And it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. I want you to see first the might in verses 11 through 12. You see, this false prophet is very powerful. He rises up from the earth rather than the sea like the first beast. But he is fake. He is false. He is a wolf in lamb's clothing, has the 2 horns, but comes in and tries to copy the lamb from earlier in the book that we know is Jesus Christ. Tries to come in like he really is something. But when he speaks, or when it speaks, talks about it in the neuter form there, when it speaks, the cover-up is gone. The false prophet speaks like a dragon. Why? Because it's the mouthpiece of the dragon. And who was the dragon? Do you remember? Satan is the dragon. So the false prophet speaks for the dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence. And remember the power of the first beast that's in Revelation 13:4, just about 7 verses from where we started. It says, "And they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And then right here, we see the first make. He makes the earth and the earth's dwellers to worship the first beast. He mentions again, as he did in the passage on the first beast, that the Antichrist had a mortal wound that was healed. Now think about what happens here. So you've got Satan, the dragon, and the Trinity would be trying to pretend like he is God the Father. Then you have the Antichrist, the second part of the unholy Trinity, trying to act like Jesus, the Son. And then you have the third part, the false prophet, who tries to act as the Holy Spirit. And so now when you look back at it and you see the Antichrist had a mortal wound and was healed, what is the devil trying to do? Trying to trick people into thinking that this is just like Jesus. Because what did Jesus have? He had a mortal wound that killed him. And on the third day, what did he do? He rose again. And most of the world does not believe. But when it happens to that first beast, when it happens to the Antichrist, they will all say, who is like the beast? He was dead and lives again. And they will worship. The very thing that the world now says is ridiculous, that we believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross and on the third day rose again, the whole world will believe when it happens with the Antichrist. Then they will be all about it. You see, the devil Satan uses deception and outright power to make the people worship the Antichrist. And he does that through the words of the false prophet. I want you to see, second, the miracles in verses 13 through 15. He also uses miracles. It's not the first time in the Bible that evil people have used miracles. Do you remember the magicians in Egypt? They wanted to hold Israel into slavery. And so what were they able to do? They were able to recreate things that Moses had done. Being able to throw down the snake and have the river do things. All these things that Moses did, a lot of times the magicians were able to do it until God finally started doing stuff that not even the magicians could make happen. Earlier in the book of Revelation, we had the two witnesses of God who had came and called down fire from heaven. And what does this false witness do now? What does this false witness do? He calls down fire. Looks like it comes from heaven. And that's the second make. He makes fire to come down from the sky. Back when the two witnesses of God had fire come down, some people believed, but most would not repent. But many believed the false gospel of the false prophet. He deceives the people with these miracles. He tells them to make, again, that same word again. He makes them make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. What does the Lamb come with? The Lamb of God comes with the sword of truth. But the false prophet says, see, the Antichrist was wounded by a sword and yet still lives. Always trying to one-up God. Then an amazing thing happens. They make an idol, they make an image that looks like the Antichrist. And it's there, and it's a statue. And it's standing there, and then what happens? The false prophet makes it speak. See, everybody then starts worshiping it. They're like, wow, I have never seen a statue speak before. You're talking about something made out of metal, and then all of a sudden being able to speak. I don't think it's going to be like a robot, or like those creepy things at Chuck E. Cheese. You know what I'm talking about? You go to Chuck E. Cheese and they've got the bear that talks to you and all that. I don't think that's what it's going to be like. I think this is going to be something where it's going to blow everybody's mind that sees it. But you know, Satan will get us, and he'll really do anything to get us to worship anything besides God. About sports heroes. You ever met anybody that they just worship somebody that could play basketball or football or baseball or hockey or whatever it is? Sometimes we'll just worship personal heroes that we have. You know, sometimes people worship their parents. Sometimes they worship their grandparents. Some people worship money. We've all known somebody that worships money. There's people that worship money. There's people that worship power or fame or fortune. There's even people, and this is the one I've never understood, people that worship actors and actresses and just think they could do no wrong. Like I've said before, you know what an actor and actress gets paid to do? To be something that they're not really, right? But yet when they want to tell us something, everybody's like, oh, well, gosh, if Tom Cruise said it, it must be true. You know? Oh, if I can't even think of any other. If Daniel Radcliffe, there you go. Harry Potter. If he tells us it's true, it must be true. But you know what we'll worship more than anything else? Actually can show you the idol. As you walk out the back door, if you'll look to your left, you can see the idol that most end up worshiping. It's a mirror. You see yourself in it, because that's what we'll worship more than anything. And that's the easiest one for Satan. He can get us to think it is enough about ourselves that we'll want to worship ourselves. Then, after he makes them to worship the Antichrist, then we have the fourth make here that I want to point out. It says he makes all those who don't worship the image to be killed. That's a high price to pay for doing the right thing. Are you ready? When this time comes, if you don't worship the Antichrist, he will kill you. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do you remember those guys? They wouldn't bow down. Nebuchadnezzar says, you're going to bow down and work. They said, we're not going to. And you could throw us in that fiery furnace. And if you throw us in the fiery furnace, our God can save us out of it alive. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down and worship. And what happened? God saved him. He had the fourth man walking in that fire with him like the Son of God. On November 9th, 1549, Jacob Claes is burned to death in Amsterdam for doing the following things. Joined the doctrine, sect, and heresies of the Anabaptist, having rebaptized. You know what they meant by rebaptized? They meant going up in there and being baptized after you were a believer. That's what they meant. For holding pernicious views in regard to the sacraments of the Holy Church. He believed that the bread isn't really the flesh of Christ and that the wine isn't really the blood of Christ, but that we do it in remembrance of him. That we use the bread to remember his flesh and remember his blood. They said he was contrary to the holy Christian faith, the ordinances of the Holy Christian Church, and the written laws and decrees of his imperial majesty, our gracious Lord, and moreover, he obstinately persists in his errors and heresy, notwithstanding the instruction which has been given him concerning the true faith. Basically, they said, you haven't been a good Catholic. They put him to death. There's a high price to pay for following Jesus. There will be a high price to pay for following Jesus. Finally, let's look at the mark here. Let's look at the mark. The fifth make. All must be marked on the right hand or the forehead. All, it says small and great, rich and poor, free and slave. Everybody's got to be marked with the mark of the beast. Now, it's interesting when you start to think about this. The mark of the beast has to go where? On the hand or on the head? You remember the Shema? We talked about the Shema before. From Deuteronomy 6. All the time, this is what most Jews, they want this to be the last thing that they say before they die. And it's such an important passage in the Jewish faith. And you got to remember who's reading this for the most part when John's writing it. Jewish people. So they would remember this from Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Now listen to this. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Where did God say, this is what the scripture that I'm giving you is going to be like? Where's it going to be? On your hand and on your forehead, as it came down as a frontlet between your eyes. The Jews would have the Shema, that passage right there, hanging down on their forehead, tied to their hands. And it says here, you're either going to have, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, or you will have the mark of the beast. There will be no difference. Either you have the mark of the beast, or you're going to have the mark of God on you. You can't do any business without the mark of the beast. You can't buy, you can't sell, you can't eat. The message is clear. Worship the beast or die. And he says here that it will be the name or the number of its name. And some people would say, well, what about the number of the beast? Now, I remember back in the 80s that people said that President Reagan was the Antichrist. And how did they get that out? Well, because Ronald Wilson Reagan his first, middle, and last name had 6 letters. So that must be it. It's 666. So he was the Antichrist. Look, trying to do this with English doesn't make sense. Really, there's dozens of interpretations. I think there's 2 of them that really probably hold some water. And the first is this, is that it's just the number of a man. It's just the number of a man. So in the Bible, 7 is considered perfection or completion, the number 7. And the number 6 is considered the number of man. So the number of God would be basically 777, triple perfection, the Trinity. And then here what we would have is the number of a man who is not perfect, but is there one step under God, 666. So triple imperfection. So that's one way that people look at it, and they figure, you'll know it when you get it. But I think gematria is actually a better thing here. Gematria is basically biblical numerology. And it goes back now. I want you to be careful. Don't go on Google and start searching up biblical numerology, because there are some people that will tell you some crazy stuff about that. I mean, they've gone crazy with it. But this, I think it's good to look at it, because what does he say? It's the number of its name. All right, so he's telling you there's something there. Well, that's the way that they would do. They would be able to take Hebrew and they would be able to turn it into numbers, and then you would have a number there. So I think John's people understood it. He says, figure this out. This is some wisdom you need to know. Now, here's why I think they're going to be able to figure it out. The Greek name for Emperor Nero was Neron Caesar. Neron Caesar. Now, if you take his Greek name and you translate it into Hebrew, and then you use the gematria, those numerical rules, and use those numbers assigned to the Hebrew letters, guess what happens when you put them together? The number is 666. 666. I think that's pretty incredible when you think about it, because who was the worst for the Christians when it came to the Caesars? It was Nero. He basically burnt down Rome and blamed the Christians for it, and had some of the worst persecution that had happened to the Christian church happened at the hands of Nero. But now what's so interesting about this is that at the time that John wrote this, Nero had been dead for 30 years. So what does this mean? I believe it means that it will be a leader like Nero. It will be someone that will have all of this hostility to the followers of the true God, that will demand worship of himself the same way that Nero did. You can't say for certain what this mark will be. It'll be 666. Right? We'll know it when we see it. No theories without its problems, but we'll know it when we see it. So right now, you need a face covering, a mask to buy or sell. I don't believe that it's the mark of the beast. I really don't even think it's close. Same goes with a vaccine. Now, I'm not going to let anybody implant me with a microchip. I think a lot of that's probably a conspiracy theory. I don't know, but I'll just know I just don't want a microchip in me anyway, right? That's just not something I'm interested in. I'm just not interested in having anything like that in my body. I don't think it has anything to do with the mark of the beast. How do I say that? Well, because the one world government isn't here. If you were outside yesterday when the clouds moved, you would know that the sun is just as bright as ever. It's not a third darkened. Anybody seen any water turn to blood? A third of the water turn to blood. Hadn't seen that yet. And I have not yet seen the dragon or the Antichrist. So I will say then those things are not the mark of the beast. But we'll know. We'll know when the time comes. It's a name or the number of a name. We're going to know. We're going to know and we will understand, because it says this calls for wisdom. Let one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For it's the number of a man, and his number is 666. And I think we'll be able to figure it out when the time comes. But the question is, are you ready when the test comes? Who or what do you worship now? In a time of relative ease and lack of persecution, if you have trouble following Christ, then you're going to really have trouble following Christ when it means you die. What mark is on you? The mark of God or the mark of the world? Let's bow our heads for just a minute here.